Good evening, ghoulies and ghosties and long-leggedy beasties. This is Alex, coming at you from the underworld, and welcome back to another episode of... I hope everyone seeing this is doing well, because we're still under self-quarantine, and Carrie and I were trying to do as much as we can to stay at home and only make necessity runs when need be. And we have really been doing the whole social distancing thing a great deal, because normally what we would do is go to the gym and work out and stuff, but what we've been doing now is just simply going for a walk in the park, and when someone else comes to us, like running the opposite direction, we move over to one side to put that 6-foot distance between ourselves and the other individual. So, speaking of walks, that actually brings us to the book that I'm reviewing this weekend, which is The Long Walk by Richard Bachman. And such as the last few videos I've done, this is a book that had been recommended to me by a friend named Tammy Mitchell. And such as myself, Tammy is an Aries. So, happy birthday, Tammy!
It's also your birthday.
Oh, you didn't have to.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Alex. Happy birthday to you.
Make a wish?
Yeah.
All
Close
right.
your eyes and blow out the candle.
Oh! Ah! What the hell is wrong with you? I bet Tammy doesn't have to go through this kind of crap. I bet when she gets a cake, it just gets handed to her. What the hell? As far as Tammy and myself are concerned, we have been friends for quite a few years. And the first time I ever met her was when she worked at a bookstore that I frequented, and we would always just make small talk over our favorite authors and books, and also kind of like throw titles back and forth at one another of what we really thought the other person should read. And after a few months of doing this, she had mentioned that there was an opening available at that bookstore. And since I like books and she seemed like a pleasant person to work around, I went on and filled out an application. And after about maybe 2 or 3 interviews, I was working with Tammy. Well, the whole acquaintance relationship she and I had, that quickly blossomed into a really good friendship. And with the store being a dying bookstore inside of a dying mall, we had a lot of downtime on our hands, especially after we finished off our work. And what we would do is we would just kick back with some sodas and some snacks, and we would talk about our favorite books and favorite authors, and we would give recommendations back and forth to one another, and we just spent that time totally geeking out. Well, this one occurrence, she had said that I really needed to read the book The Long Walk by Richard Bachman. And I really did not care about dystopian style horror, but she kept on, and because she's that kind of Aries, if you don't do what she wants you to, she's going to ride your ass until you eventually do it. Well, I'm the kind of Aries where if you push me into doing something, I'm just going to hold off from doing it even longer. So we kind of had that tug of war sort of thing going on with that. And the years would pass and she would continue to ask if I had read the book yet, and I would always say no. But last year, I decided that I was going to start working out and going to the gym and start running. And I decided this would be a perfect time to start listening to the audiobook of The Long Walk. So as I was working out, I would listen to this audiobook, and damn, in the words of Tammy, my damn, it was an experience, because I just really thought the subject line was going to be something simplistic and it was going to be thoughtless, but this book was honestly a lot more than what I had bargained for. And at the end of the day, all I can say is, Tammy, I'm sorry I did not read it sooner. I really appreciate this recommendation because I love this book, and I hope you enjoyed the review that I'm about to give. The Long Walk by Stephen King is one of the 4 Bachman books, but unfortunately this is an out-of-print collection. And the reason why is because there's a story in here called Rage, which after this was published, there was a school shooting and Stephen King decided to discontinue that story, which in turn made it where this book was unavailable. But if you're interested in reading the remaining stories, those have all been individually printed, so you can get those individually by print, ebook, and audiobook, so you can still get those in your hands. But with The Long Walk, this is really a simple story, but it packs a lot into it. And it takes place at the American-Canadian border, and it presents an event that only happens once a year. Now, at the beginning of this story, we're introduced to the character Ray Garrity Davis, which for the most part, he's just called Garrity. And we learn that his mother does not want him to participate in this marathon because of all of the dangers that come along with it. However, he's 16 years old, which makes him of legal age of consent to walk in the marathon. He's also applied to be one of the walkers, and in turn, he was randomly selected to participate. Plus, it's a little too late now for him to back out. So he gets onto site and he meets all of his opponents and all that good stuff, and you get some backstory here. And after some backstory and rules are set, we have where the marathon begins. And the thing is, this is actually a national sporting event. Like, you have television stations that make it available for families to watch from home. You have people that show up all over the nation and they just stand along the sidelines and watch the walkers as they compete. And the name of the game is really simple. All you have to do is be the last person walking out of a group of 100 people. And if you are that one person who's been able to walk further than everyone else, then you win. And after winning anything your heart desires, it is yours. And you are treated like a king until the day you die. However, there is some kind of dark subtext that I really didn't mention here, because after all, this is a Stephen King book. And what happens is we learn that you cannot go under 4 miles an hour if you are walking in this marathon. Also, you cannot stop and you cannot pause. You have to stay 4 miles an hour. If you do anything other than stay at 4 miles an hour, the firing squad, which has been following you, will give you a warning. After your third warning, they will shoot you dead where you stand without any questions asked. And at the end of the day, this is not a marathon to see who can walk the longest. This is a marathon to see who can outlive everyone else. Stephen King wrote The Long Walk in the fall of 1966 and the spring of 1967 while he was a college freshman. After completing The Long Walk, he submitted it in a first novel competition held by Random House. In turn, he received a rejection letter from the publisher that said, "No comment of any kind." From here, The Long Walk would become a trunk novel until its publication in 1979. On the official website for Stephen King, King says the plot of The Long Walk was due to how in the early 60s, radio and TV stations nationwide organized 50-mile hikes. And when he wrote The Long Walk, he didn't have a car, so he hitchhiked everywhere. King also notes he didn't finish his 50-mile hike and he fell out after 20 miles. Fun facts! Even though we know a lot about Stephen King, here's some things about Richard Bachman. Richard Bachman is Stephen King's alter ego, and he was supposed to exist for the long haul while staying under the radar from the masses, where his books were intended for drugstore and bus station book racks. However, after releasing 5 trunk books under the Richard Bachman pseudonym, King was found out and the intended long haul came to an abrupt stop. This experience later inspired King to write The Dark Half, and Bachman would remain dead until King wrote Desperation, and Bachman wrote Desperation's companion book, The Regulators. Now that we have that out of the way, it's time to move on to the spoiler section, which if you haven't read this book, this is where I'm going to reveal some subjects that could ruin the experience for you if you have never read this before. Now, if you like, you can scroll down to the comments section and you will see that there's a pinned comment with a timestamp in it. If you click on that timestamp, it will redirect you to the thoughts section of this video. Now, you only have 17 seconds to do this. So, ready, set, go. Now that everyone has had the opportunity to click away, I would like to talk about some of the scenes that I just did not expect. Now, the first thing that really surprised me was I didn't expect to have our first kill by chapter 2, but we did, and from there the body count just continues to rise. Now, one scene that really stood out to me, and this was a scene that was quickly portrayed, it wasn't really dwelled on or anything like that. It was where the character named Traven ends up getting a bad case of diarrhea due to the amount of walking he has done. And it just so happens that while he's squatting to relieve himself, that's when he receives his third warning and he receives his ticket. And so the soldiers shoot him while he's in mid-squat. And, you know, I'm like, that is some shit right there. If I was in a race like that, I'd probably be shot with my drawers down. That would probably be me. I could see a shitty moment like that happening. But anyway, the most disturbing scene in this book, though, and this is a scene that I would rank up there with Stephen King's most disturbing scenes ever, is the scene where Olsen gets his ticket. And at this point, we have the idea that the soldiers have become bored and they're trying to ease their boredom. So what they do, instead of shooting Olsen in the head and just putting him out of his misery quickly, they shoot him in the stomach and avoid his vital organs. Well, Olsen has some pretty good willpower here, so he just, holds his stomach, gets up, and continues to try to walk. Well, the soldiers continue shooting him in the stomach to the point where he becomes disemboweled. And Olsen, who is still alive, reaches down, grabs his guts from off of the ground, holds them to himself, and continues walking in a hunched position. And the soldiers don't do anything else to him after this. They just walk alongside of him, and they see exactly how long it takes for him to finally slump over and die, which eventually does happen. And the way that this scene is constructed and how it drags on, it's cruel. It is cruel, and it is just very horrifically done. And it's definitely a scene that's going to haunt me for years to come. But one moment that really surprised me was the moment where Barkovich killed himself. And how he does that is he starts ripping out his throat, which I honestly did not think Barkovich would be the character to snap here because of all of the shit talking he did prior to this. I honestly thought that he was going to die simply because his body couldn't go any further, not a mental break. So that was a surprise. But the ending of this was really sad, especially when McVries finally dies. And I say that because there's a bond between McVries and Garrity, and it never really comes out and says that McVries is like a closet gay or closet bi or whatever, but there's totally some sexual innuendos that he does throw at Garrity, and some suggestions that he throws out there as well. And the thing is, they do form a bond. And it's just so sad to see that shattered at the end, but of course there can only be one winner, and that one winner ends up being Garrity. But what's shocking about this is there's no happy ending here, because when the Major goes over to congratulate Garrity, he puts his hand on Garrity's shoulder, and Garrity hauls ass. And that's the end of the story. And even though it's as simple as what it is, I couldn't help but think, that poor kid is never going to be right again. After everything he's been through, he's probably got like post-traumatic stress or shell shock or something like that. And life as he knew it is never going to be the same. Here's the thing about Stephen King. He knows how to create an asshole kid because he understands kids are assholes. And the older they get, the more of an asshole they become. And with the kids in this book, they're all pretty much smart asses, which I really liked because it built character for them. But there was one kid that was a total asshole, and that was Barkovich. Because, I mean, he was cocky, arrogant, he was a racist, he was self-absorbed, and he never shut up about his big plans on how he was going to win the marathon. Which, of course, this was just him trying to psych out everyone around him. But if he did actually have some plans, we never knew what those was because he went batshit crazy and ripped out his own throat. Now, one of the characters who really did surprise me was Stebbins, and I did not expect this whatsoever, but it comes to be that Stebbins is the bastard child of the Major. And when the Major found out this, he also discovered that Stebbins wanted to live with him if he won the marathon. And so the Major teaches Stebbins all of these ins and outs of the marathon, and this isn't so Stebbins can win and live with him. This is so Stebbins can lead a pack of boys onto a longer walk and make it more strenuous and more stressful, and just to make it more horrific. So, of course, Stebbins does this, and I think he does it more so because he wants his father's approval, but that's still just messed up. It really is. And the final character I want to touch on here is the Major. Now, with the Major, he only has like maybe about a half a page of book time throughout the entirety of this novel. But knowing what I know about him through Stebbins and some of the other kids and stuff, this son of a bitch needs to be forced to walk a long walk with all of his little soldiers and stuff. Because what he is completely sadistic. He is a sadistic sack of shit, and he needs to suffer the exact same way that all of these boys have. The Long Walk is a prime example of how the elite can dangle a carrot in front of those who are less fortunate while capitalizing off of every second of it. And I say that because you literally have a mass human slaughter here that they televise and they consider to be a national sporting event. And the story even goes deeper than that because if you read it past a surface read, you see that this is really a character study of those who have suffered at war. And since this was written in the 1960s, I tend to think that maybe Vietnam might have inspired some of the theme. And I think this because when the boys apply to be in the marathon, they are randomly selected. So that's how you get your 100 boys, is the random selection. And it reminds me of how the draft was. And from there, you have where the boys are walking in the marathon and everyone is dying around them. And they have no other choice but to continue forward. And from here, we start seeing where they develop like post-traumatic stress and shell shock. And we just see their different levels of mental ability as they continue forward and how that's broken down. Now, with Stephen King and Richard Bachman, yes, they are the same person. But at the same time, Bachman is so much darker than King, because with King, with his work, you at least have some kind of glimmer of hope that something is going to be okay. But with Richard Bachman, he takes that glimmer of hope and he squishes it under his shoe while he just stares you in the face and smiles. The Long Walk is a book that could be read in about 2 or 3 days, but it is not a lighthearted read whatsoever. And you become very emotionally connected with the characters because they are so well developed. And even though with one of the characters that I knew was going to win, I just had the horror of what's going to prevent him from reaching his goal and what's going to happen to him after he wins. And another character in here who I absolutely loved, you can see it coming from a mile away that something bad is going to happen to him. And even though you know this is going to happen, when it does happen, it still ripped my heart out. And so I was very emotionally invested, and I almost actually cried in it. So it almost brought me to tears. And with this book, I do feel that it can really have some good discussions that come from it, because Tammy and myself, we've had a lot of really great discussions about this book. Plus, I do think that if you're a fan of something like the Hunger Games or whatnot, I don't believe the Hunger Games would have existed if King had not written The Long Walk. So definitely go back and read this and see what might have been going on in his mindset during the 60s. And overall, obviously, as you can tell, I do highly recommend this book. On to the questions. My first question is, what is a dystopian horror book that you would recommend for me to read? Load up the comments. My second question is, would you participate in a long walk if you knew that you could possibly win whatever your heart desired? Why or why not? Personally, if I had to do it for myself, I wouldn't. I would rather just stay in poverty and be blissfully ignorant of what I was missing out on with the riches. But if I had to do it for someone else, like if it was someone on their deathbed and I loved them, it was a close person to me, then I would perhaps do it for them. But it would depend on the circumstance and who it was. So as far as myself is concerned, I would not do it for myself, but I would possibly do it for someone else. So now that we have that covered, it's time to wrap up the video, and I would like to say thank you to Lisa G, Joseph Baylott, and J.L. Mulvihill, which J.L. Mulvihill is a young adult author, so if you happen to look her up, it is the initials J and L Mulvihill, and she writes young adult steampunk and fantasy. And also, if you contact her, be sure to let her know Alex sent you. And the reason why I'm thanking these wonderful people is because they have been gracious enough to contribute to my Patreon account. And if you would like to contribute as well, just go to the description section of this video, click on my Patreon link, and you'll have two options to be able to donate to me monthly. Both options, I will give you a thank you at the end of each of my videos. And if you are a creator as well, such as J.L. Mulvihill, I will give you a shout out on what your profession is so people can find you online and also get into your work. But if you are unable to contribute, that's no sweat whatsoever. All I ask is that you simply continue returning to this channel and having a good time. But if you do contribute, just know that whatever money you are contributing is going to props and also saving up for better equipment. So it's not something that I'm just running out and blowing. But once again, thank you. And if you would like to connect with me on social media, all of the links for my Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram are in the description section as well. And if you have yet to subscribe to this channel, be sure to subscribe and hit that notifications bell because I have tons of more book reviews coming in the near future. And until we see each other again, please stay safe, please stay in good spirits, and if you're feeling under the weather, I hope you feel better soon, and sweet nightmares.